Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever the world you are. I hope you're doing great and having a wonderful day with the summer that is coming up. So here in the Netherlands, it's really good weather today. So I hope you also enjoy your day. So yeah, very excited again to be here with another session from Microsoft Zero to Hero Learning Room community. Today we have again a special guest and special speaker, professional, gonna share some experience with us. So excited to learn more about new experiences, about getting some new knowledge and keeping ourselves up to date all together within Microsoft Learning Room communities. I'm gonna add my slide quickly to the stage. Today we have Mohit Sharma about secure and compliant Azure resource management, mastering Azure Bicep modules for DevOps excellence. So again, welcome to Azure Zero to Hero live session. So this session is about Azure services, Azure technologies. As you may already notice, so we had a little bit of rebranding. So now with the umbrella of Microsoft Zero to Hero community, every session we launch. So it depends on the technology and the speaker about what technology category they're going to share experience with us. So we are changing the name on our slide. So it could be AI Zero to Hero, could be Data Zero to Hero, or Azure Zero to Hero. So welcome again. I'm not going to take more time in the session, just quickly going to introduce about Microsoft Learn, talking about Microsoft Learning Rooms and how it can help you achieve your goals and learn more on a daily basis. And then I will add Mohit to the stage and hand over the stage to him and can continue with the session. So Microsoft Learn, that's so exciting. Again, mentioning, I really love to mention it in every session we have. So I will try to mention it with the next 1,000 sessions with the community. Just make Microsoft Learn your homepage. Every time you open your laptop, your phone browser, just see Microsoft Learn, just see the latest updates, just see Azure updates, any technology you follow, doesn't matter. You have from exam practices to different kind of customized training paths. You can design your own learning paths and you can study in there, you can gain badges, you can take certifications, and also you can do apply the skills just to prove that you are a professional, an expert with that specific topic. And that will be in your socials, that will be your official Microsoft Learn profile transcript, which will help you to prove that you are professional and again, specifically that you are a learner mindset. So just follow aka.ms learning rooms and also aka.ms/join zero to hero. Then you will have a form from Microsoft Learn. You will have the chance to fill in that form, and then you will automatically will be added to the community. So this is exciting because we are in Microsoft Build months. Microsoft Build is going to start May 21st till May 23. And just go for it, just register for it, prepare your calendar, prepare for every session, prepare for exciting experience, great stuff that you are going to learn from it. Because our community calendar for this month is also exclusive for Microsoft Build. As we also mentioned in a previous session, this month's calendar is on fire together with Microsoft Build, and this is going something fantastic. As a last slide I have in my presentation at this moment is about code of conduct. So being aware of each other and others, being friendly and patient during the session, and being respectful and welcoming, opening to all questions and viewpoints, understanding of each other's differences, and being kind and considerate to others. So thanks again for joining. I'm going to add Mohit to stage. Hi, Mohit.
Hi, Ahmed. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks for being here. So excited to learn more about your experience. I'm going to remove my slide and I will add. Okay, this is your presentation.
Uh, Thank you, Ahmed. I hope you could see it. And I agree, Microsoft Learn is kind of a very great resource. A lot of stuff that goes on there is very hands-on. You could just pick and choose and just apply directly. It's
And
amazing.
that's really cool, isn't it? Because you
It
can
is.
do like exam tests. That's perfect. This is something maybe
It
sometime like people are missing, but this is really a rich and great place that if you want to start your learning path and continue your career with. And Mohit, what do you think about Microsoft Build? That's gonna start soon. Can you share
Oh
some
yeah,
insights
I'm
about
gonna
it?
miss it, but I really wanted to be there. I'm always excited for that. And with this AI thing going on, it's amazing. Every event that Microsoft hosts, they hosted one in Oslo, and now this, everything is just moving so fast to keep track. You have to attend those sessions. It's bleeding edge right now. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a great comment. I really love it that everything is moving so fast. So we need to
so
learn
fast.
every day. So
And if
just
you,
keeping ourselves.
yeah, these events are a great tool to be there. You can't keep up with all the news until you hear somebody say something about it. Yeah,
Exactly,
cool.
exactly. Uh, I'm not gonna take more of your time, so I'm gonna remove myself from the stage. Good luck with the session. So the stage is yours.
You do that. Thank you so much, Amit. Okay, coming back to my session. I hope you could see my screen. I want to start with a little bit of introduction of myself. My name, of course, Mohit Sharma, as Hamid said. I am a chief consultant at Atea, which is one of the biggest consulting services in Norway. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. I have an overall experience of around 15 years with Microsoft and the technologies around it, the cloud and the data centers. I've had my fair share with artificial intelligence and machine learning too. So for a very brief phase, around a year or two, I was a data scientist. So whatever is happening right now sort of excites me to another level, if I could say that. Yeah. And with that, today I'm going to introduce you to something that's sort of a buzzword and sort of a very important a very important thing that you could do to achieve a healthy infrastructure in cloud. But for some reason, sometimes it's not managed correctly, or sometimes uh, it's not taken up in a right way in an organization, so that it eventually loses its luster there. Yeah, so it eventually loses its shine. And to make sure initiatives like infrastructure as code are done right, are done in a way that makes the adoption a bit easier, is, in my personal experience, a bit of an art where some things can be learned and the other things depend on the organization. So I'm going to talk about something that is fairly bit common with most of my customers that I experience. There are tad bits of variations, which again depends on the company you're working with, on the client you're working with. But I've seen this approach and I've implemented this approach for a couple of my clients. This is one of the approach. So there are many others, but I'm going to introduce you to one of them. Now, the gist of the session is basically that I'm going to talk about how you could structure Microsoft Azure Bicep with the help of modules and DevOps in such a way that the adoption becomes fairly flat instead of being too steep. The to start with it, for the uninitiated, infrastructure as code is basically just simplified version of a complicated code that used to be there, but we're writing simplified code, which used to be ARM and which is further simplified to Bicep. So I'm going to talk about Bicep. The infrastructure as a code is basically managing and provisioning infrastructure through code instead of doing it manually with ClickOps. ClickOps is bad because it's non-repeatable, uh, because you cannot always go ahead and create the same thing. There is bound to be variations. It's human nature. It's possible to make sure that the infrastructure that you've created with code maintains its integrity to desired state. That's a huge advantage. You avoid drifts that eventually creep up to the system and make them vulnerable. So, if in case this is done right, this gives you a space where everything remains as is, and it gives you a better exposure to how to secure your resources. A good example of why this thing is important is because when people do it on their own, they eventually go for the easier route. A deployment for, let's say, web app might not always have HTTPS enabled for it, but you as an organization, you need it. When Defender detects that certain web apps are not being operated as HTTPS only, or the deployments are not happening as FTPS only, it complains. What happens is that eventually you go to the teams and you request them if they can do that. Now, developer teams are mostly overburdened and they have less staff to go around with all the tasks. So if you give them additional tasks, it becomes a bit frustrating. These and many other factors lead to isolation where infrastructure as code is just relegated to one of those things that was tried once. And developers silently move along and go back to ClickOps most of the time. Or they do not want to, they start developing their own templates. That's bad as far as the integrity of an organization as an environment goes. If every department has their own infrastructure as code, that's bad, because then basically nobody has the correct stuff there, right? And if nobody starts adopting infrastructure as code because it becomes frustrating, that's another situation. You basically had a very good opportunity, and now you're stuck in a phase where people have deployed and that thing is in production, but now you cannot update, change, or rectify it because developers are too afraid to touch it. Yeah. Infrastructure as code is important because it gives you speed of deployment. That's very important, and that's, in my personal opinion, has been the selling point to developers. Cost reduction is, of course, for management very attractive. It scales very fast, and I'm going to show how this fast can be hyper scaled. So you dumb it down to such a level that there's no there's no argument against it. Because this is code, every activity is auditable there. And because this is code, again, it could be redeployed a number of times and very fast. Coupled with the fast, it gives you a huge disaster recovery advantage there. Now, why is infrastructure hated so much in certain organizations? Yes, it is adopted forcefully sometimes, and yes, it might not have been explained in a very good way. So that is an obvious reason. But there are other things too. People who are working and already doing code, it might it might give them challenges to adopt to a different kind of language. Yeah. So it has a steep learning curve, and as I talked before a little bit, it has a steep implementation curve too, because developers have already done something. They mostly come back because they will have to do the work again if they start implementing something new. It takes time to convince and adopt. So if it's not done correctly, every other iteration of going through it takes more time, in my opinion. In my experience, it takes more time. You get more debates, you get more push from the teams. It has a steep implementation curve too. So that's why it's important to plan and jump into this. Yeah. Uh, because developer teams and infrastructure teams are separate, even though we live in an era of DevOps, it sometimes becomes a little bit of a point of contention of who is responsible for the infrastructure of code. Yeah, because developers are coders, right? So it sometimes is assumed that they would do it. But when every developer does their own infrastructure as code, you end up in a situation where everybody is doing the exact same thing, the result of ClickOps, but just in a different way. Everybody used to do ClickOps in a different way. Now they're doing infrastructure as a code in a different way. So even though adoption happened, everybody's doing it in their own way. So everybody has their own flavor to it. That, in my opinion, is at times worse than not adopting the infrastructure as code. And there's a reason behind it, because when you commit, when you marry to something, you want to stay with it. So it makes template adoption a bit more concrete for them. They don't want to move in because the developers have an argument that we're doing it already and ours is correct. Yeah, so there's no one source of truth. There's no single code base that could be followed. Right? Naming conventions and tags and everything. Wild west, basically. Yeah. Infrastructure as code might not be the easiest thing to debug if in certain situations, and that's why you need to make sure that the plan is foolproof and that everything that's passed on for adoption is tested, validated, corrected to such an extent that there might be very little, if not an option to get an error. Right? Uh, if you just end up with giving certain variable values, it might just become so easy that people want to go there because all they get is some directions and they have to put in certain values, and that's it. They move along. Now, that was the last slide. I'm going to take you to the practical. I'm going to show you a sample implementation of my approach. I am going to use infrastructure as code for Bicep, and I'm going to specifically utilize modules. Modules are Bicep sort of a construct in Bicep where you could have a code, package it, and submit it to a container registry, let's say, and you could refer that set of code through another file, another Bicep file that refers that module. And it's very helpful for two reasons. First, you go ahead and create the module that you as an IT administrator desire. Yeah. So you consult your security team, what parameters do you need for that particular resource? You make sure you jot it down, you create a template around it, you make sure you test it, you do all your due diligence so that it has at least basic security around it. And when you do that, you can submit that code, you can compile it, you can submit it to and create a repository around it. That way, the user just has to refer that secure code. And that reference is what creates resources for them. So the burden of securing a resource, burden of knowing the nitty-gritties of that resource, the burden of creating Bicep templates, these big, giant responsibilities are moved away. And because you and I as an IT administrator are doing it, you kind of have to do it once. And after that, you just iterate over it. Yeah, so a careful planning, careful due diligence, the adoption becomes such easier that it's as easy as referring to a particular code at some repository, which we will also create right now. Now, the other thing why this module concept is very important is because, of course, it can be stored. It could be stored. It could be version controlled. So these things are derived primarily of how code works. So all of this is version controlled, plus it's available and it could be stored in a repository. That's a huge advantage because a compiled version works very fast. You might not notice how Bicep is executed if you're doing small deployment, but in a case of a deployment for a disaster recovery, let's say, a pre-compiled code works marvels, very fast. So when business is at risk, this thing would be a huge advantage. Yeah. Cool. So we start our journey from creating a container registry. So all I've done is create a container registry, and this is no biggie. You could go to Azure portal, you could search container registry and create one. There's nothing exceptional around it. Yeah. Now I know I'm talking about infrastructure as code, but I'm showing you ClickOps. But the point of this is that this is the starting point, and it's very easy to do it. I don't have a network restriction on it. You could have a network restriction on it, and I actually prefer having a network restriction on it so that only you and your organization can refer to the code. And it's not available over the internet. As we'll see, you just have to refer to one particular address. That's container registry address. Now, container registries are famous for having repositories. And as you can see, I have a couple of repositories, and all of this is Bicep code dedicated to a particular resource. Example, let's take a simple one, resource group. This resource group code is a pre-compiled code that would take a couple of arguments and just deploy resource group as I want it. So now the simplest way I've done it is I've created it to have a couple of tags, pre-populated tags. Producers put code in this repository, compile it, save it. The consumers, the developers, they refer to this code. And with that, let's go to the first section and let me talk about the producers here. Producers in general are IT department. I'm going to use Microsoft documentation here for the naming conventions. So yeah, and product abbreviation, which is universally accepted by most organizations, so it becomes easy to talk about it. The naming conventions, again, are important for a lot of other things, disaster recovery and logging and analytics and everything. I borrowed it from Microsoft, and this is one of those things why infrastructure as code shines. Every time you deploy it, you get the exact same naming convention and other things that base the infrastructure name as their bedrock. They can build upon them. Yeah. So I'm going to use these two. Now I start writing, let's say, a resource. Let's take one resource group. We start with resource groups. I'm going to take resource group. If you see here, what I've done is I've created a repository in Microsoft DevOps here. So all I've done is I've created a repository here. And under that repository, there's a folder called modules. Modules has resource templates in it. And I've distributed it as folders, so it's easier for me to manage. And the reason why that is, I have divided these resources in such a way that bare minimum of them can be deployed together. For example, a virtual network is a very good example. I've separated subnet from virtual network. So once a virtual network is deployed, yeah, a number of subnets can be deployed over it. You do not have to deploy all of it together again and again. So decoupled it just enough so that it's enough for a separate deployment, a logical deployment that's needed. So I could deploy network for the team, give them predefined networks and do all kind of configuration around it, NSGs and everything. And the people, if let's say they need an application gateway, they deploy a virtual network for application gateway, subnet for the application gateway in that virtual network. That way I manage my address list. And at the same time, I gave the developer teams freedom to deploy their own subnet. So decouple it just enough. Yeah. Storage. So coming back to the resource group, if you see, I have 3 files here. One is the version file, and this looks small, but it is a mighty powerful file. This is how you choose what is being done and what kind of versions, what kind of changes have you done. For small changes, minor. For major changes, let's say I recently did a change in my environment in which I had changed the last 3 characters here to 10 characters, so that developers were not comfortable with just numbers, so we gave them an ability to write a small description there. If you think about it, in a sense, it's a major change. You could write the major version there. Every time you change it, it's on your wisdom what kind of change it is, and you could update that, and that is reflected further in the repository here. So if you see, the first 2 are the numbers that I've defined. So 0 is the major one, the second one is the minor one. Then there's today's date and how many times today have I done the deployment. Pretty unique in my opinion. Yeah. The second file, I'm going to start with the bottom here, is my explicit deployment file for that particular resource. So if I may, I want to take you through this file in Visual Studio Code. So if you notice here, the actual deployment happens here. I've created, this is a Bicep format for deploying a resource group. So resource, name for that kind of resource, the actual Bicep template that Microsoft has created. So my template is going to build upon them to make developers' experience more simplistic. It needs name, it needs a location. I've implemented tags also. I've made sure these tags are deployed. Whenever somebody uses this compiled version, they'll have to give some input that would eventually be translated to tags. So that's my contribution. That's how I'm improving the situation of deployment for resource group. The same could be translated to log service function apps. They could be translated to everything else. So if you have network restrictions, you could have network restrictions built in, baked in on the deployment template. Yeah. Now, if you notice here, something that I want to point out is that I am not taking name as an input. So I'm not leaving anything to chance. What I'm doing here is I'm creating the name based on the deployment format that I have created, that I borrowed from Microsoft, that I've agreed with the company. Yeah? And this is after a little bit of deliberation with my customers and the others. So as I told you, I've changed the last bit. The point here is that I'm not leaving it as an input. In fact, I'm making it programmatically, I'm compiling it together by other inputs that are given to me. I leave very little chance that something could be messed up, that something could be done not according to standards. Right? Each of those parameters has a description, has an allowed set of values, and the type that it's needed. In fact, some of those also have limitations of how much could be written for them. So this way you can manage how long the name could be, or how long it has to be. Let's say it has to be more than 20 characters, a description of a resource. All of us have had situations where we're searching who owns a resource, or why does this resource exist? Yeah, these are some of the tags that Microsoft actually recommends. So a description less than 20 characters probably doesn't make sense in my world. There might be situations, but I feel like a better description has to be more than 20 characters. That's why I put in a limit of more than 20 characters. Right? Shouldn't be too long, otherwise it becomes a story. So have an upper limit. There's a description that gives it information. Now, it might feel like to read that description, you have to have the uncompiled version of this template. But stay with me on that. You don't. This here, the good governance that we're doing, the good documentation that we're doing, actually gives us a leverage when adopting this. So a couple of points here. So I have given a couple of allowed values. I've given a proper description, and I've given restrictions. All of these could be done by you. Now, let's say I am the IT guy for a company X1, because X already exists. So I have created this template. I've given it a version number. I could directly compile and submit this to the repository, but I'm a good guy, so I test it first. Because remember, one of the points was that debugging becomes a bit difficult at times. So you have to make sure that your templates actually work. For that, I've created a template, a pipeline file, which will be going to Azure DevOps. Pretty basic. And this is the trigger that says if the file under this module resource group is changed, any file here, any one of them is changed, then the pipeline runs again. I've answered all the variables that are needed. Yeah. So one of them is service connection. One of the service connection is used to create and test it in a separate subscription. The other service connection has access to another subscription, which has that container repository in which I want to publish these resources. Fairly straightforward. Variables having the name of the repository, the subscription IDs, locations, and stuff. The reason why I do this, I do not want to give it while I'm deploying something. Right? So the first step basically creates a linter, tries to lint my code to check it's doesn't have invalid deployments or invalid coding practices. Then I go ahead and deploy the file, the resource group Bicep file here, which I've referred to on a variable here, with a task That's in Azure DevOps. It's by default there, so you could just pick and choose. It's nothing explicit. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It's a very basic Azure Resource Group Manager deployment task. That's it. And now what I've done is I've given it some variables that it needs, like the service connection name, the location, subscription, the file that I'm going to be deploying, and the parameters that I have declared in my Bicep file and that I am overriding. So all of these parameters, if you see, they do not have values because uh, some of them, all of them, in fact, are being given values outside. Now, it's possible to give default also. I have one of the other templates that has a default value. So if you just do equals and give a value, that becomes a default value there. Pipeline overrides a couple of parameters. And next, I go to another stage. When this is done, the first thing I do is I check if the deployment was successful. If it was, then I just use this task of publishing. This again is from Microsoft Learn. So this is a direct copy paste code from Microsoft Learn. Very good example there of how you could publish it to the repository. And the moment I give my repository name, it takes in and publishes it under the module name that I've given. All of this is variables here. So I've given a module name here and a module version, and it just takes it and publishes and pushes it there, right? Yeah, and these could be as simple as this. The pipeline fairly remains simple, but the code for the resource could be changed, could be updated. For example, look at this code for function app. The function app, I've tried to go overboard just to show you that it's possible to overcomplicate things sometimes. Might be needed for the job, might not be needed for the job, but for my current assignment, it makes life easier for the deployment people, for the developers, sorry. Function app needs a lot of things: storage account, log analytics, application insights. I want it to have that, and that's why I'm deploying it here. It needs app service plan and other good stuff. So what I do is I go ahead and deploy everything one after the other in the pipeline. But the function app itself is another story if you think about it here. So the regular variables are here. The regular variables are all here, like the location and do you need public access, application insight key, and all that good stuff. But I've also tried to implement the various configuration that the function app could have. What kind of languages? Is it .NET? Does it run on Linux or does it run on Windows? Taking that complexity out so that I always get the latest version deployed. Yeah, and all of this has been documented, and all of these variables have documentation around it. So every time I define a parameter, I give a huge description so that people at the receiving end know what they are dealing with. Yeah. If you see, these things can be made a little bit complicated. So there is a balance that has to be there on how much do you want to deliver and for how long. I've not created all the resources, as you can see, because it depends on who and how much are they using. Yeah. Again, fairly complicated, and I'm not leaving the name to chance, because for me, name is the holy grail of a resource deployment. It has to be perfect for other things to build on it. So everything starts with a good name in my books. So name and the tags properly done right, and yeah, the output is what I want to talk here. The output, because most Bicep deployments will ask you if they are connected to other resource, they will ask you for the name or the ID. It's nice to output that directly in a variable. This is again pure Bicep syntax, and this is nothing special. This is a tag already present in Bicep. So you have to give the name and ID, and this should basically serve the need for if you want to refer it in another resource, which I do, like for example in storage virtual network subnet. And we do it in function app too. This is a standard pipeline where I deploy one resource after another, get the output, and store it in a runtime variable. So for example, I deploy the resource group, I get the resource group name, and I create a runtime variable, resource group scope name. Every other resource is then deployed to that. Okay, enough of the static things. Let's take you to the actual pipeline. How does this work? Yeah, these pipeline files are imported, direct import, and they could be used. And when you do that, it just gives you an entry like this. I like to arrange them in folders and subfolders, so it's easier for me to understand which are being tested and which are not being tested, which are being done, which of them have achieved a certain version and deployments, and which have not been done. So it's as simple as importing them and running them. So when you do that, uh, as I defined before, 3 steps. It goes ahead and updates. It runs it, and it would deploy it somewhere here. So you should see a new resource group that would come up based on naming convention, of course. And yeah, that's how you as an IT leader get control of how do you want the resources to be deployed. But there's another part of the equation. While this deployment is happening, there's another part of the equation, the adoption. The adoption is where the rubber meets the road, right? The adoption is again a point of contention here, because if it's not simple enough, people don't adopt. As simple as that. There's no second to it. Now this is where the documentation that we were doing, the restrictions that we were putting, comes into it shines, right? All the big template that you saw, this is what the receivers see, and this is all that they need to deploy a resource group. There's no variation. Everybody has to give the same parameters. Now, you might be wondering, what if they miss one of those parameters? They would get errors, and yes, they would get errors, but the Bicep has you covered, right? Let's say I want to create another resource group, right? I start with module keyword. I give it identifier. Let's say I give it an identifier. Then I refer to the whole repository. So it starts with BR because it's Bicep repository, the template or the container registry fully qualified address. Resource group is the sub part of it. I can show you again. So if you see container registry, that's the fully qualified name. This oblique the repository that you want to work with, so resource group, and the version that you want to work with. We go here, we give this, we give equals to, and this is where the magic would happen. So all of what we did culminates to this moment where the user goes, oh, that's how that happens, and they want to work with it. Yeah. So when I do this, a small pop-up happens. It gives you required properties, and that's when you hit enter, and this is what they need. So they do not need to guess. They do not need to have access to your templates. You do not need to give them access to them. All you need to give them access is to the container registry. Because they're querying this, they need to have container registry pull access. Both the user who's doing this and the service account that would be used in the pipeline. So they just need ACL pull and AC container registry read. 2 permissions, that's all. And both of those permissions are non-write. So it's easier to give them with a group or AD group, and you do not have to actually worry about it. It's just people will be able to read those templates. That's it. When you do this, you will notice that now the other point, if I look at it from as a developer perspective, I see, okay, fine, I get a couple of variables. What do I put in there? What are the accepted values? Because that's something that makes a lot of noise of what do you want me to give there. Now, all the documentation, what we gave there, if you go ahead and just hover over this, the documentation kind of comes up as documentation for the consumer. So now consumer knows that classification can only be these things, right? Yeah, so people who are dealing with purviews and Office 365, they might be familiar with this. These are well-known classifications. So now the average developer who is not a 365 administrator also knows that these things have to be done exactly this. Microsoft Code or Visual Studio Code gives you an ability to just copy and paste, and that's as simple as this becomes. Yeah, all the documentation is available here for people. They do not have to jump anywhere else. Makes the experience seamless. Adoption becomes very easy to an extent that people actually just have to copy and paste a very small section of the code. Everything else is just pre-populated. Now, all of this that I'm using here, all of this that I'm using here is compiled in the backend, as we saw in the other template, is compiled into a name, right? And all of this is put into tags and everything. So all of that is taken care by the template that I, as an IT engineer or an IT administrator, created and deployed with talking to security guys on what they need and how they need. The point is, from the consumer's perspective, it's just this. It's just this. And this is not just a resource group. This could be a function app, the one that I showed you before. It could be function app. It could be any other complicated template that we make for them. But they, as a user, do not have to deal with this. For example, I do not like to give values directly, so I've just declared them as variables. And this doesn't really make it complicated. It's just an OCD that I have. People could give values directly. I don't like that, so I've done this way. Yeah. Look at just have a look at the various resources that I'm deploying. All of them look the same. They basically have similar things going on for them. A small set of code that's available for them, and they have to just give a couple of values. Depends on is a little bit familiarity that you need with Bicep, but that you could give it as a sample. Right now, what I'm doing this is what I make for the consumer a sample repository, and I give them a YAML that and a Bicep file that gives them an example of what can be achieved and how they can be achieved there. So a very, very flat learning curve, if you think about it. Just a very flat learning curve, a couple of concepts, and it's done. They do not have to know the whole Bicep. We just saw the function app, right? How complicated that was. And this is as complicated as it gets for them. Most of these are generic values that were available for them. And everything else is pretty self-explanatory most of the time here. So if you need an application insight, you have deployed an application insight here. So all you do is copy that, dot output dot this, because we declared the IDs and the names, the resource IDs before. We did all of the groundwork, and now people can reap the benefits of it. So whatever resource they deployed, just to refer to the resource. Let's say they deployed a storage account, and they need to refer to the storage account. All they need to do is just write the name, dot output, and the name. That's it. Very, very, very flat learning curve. So instead of going through and learning the whole Bicep as a language, which kind of hinders the adoption to an extent, this makes it relatively easy for them to get on board, try it out, and makes it easier for you now because you've already deployed a resource. Where's the pipeline? Yeah. So now that you've already deployed a resource, you know that your stuff works. It does work because you have proper tags, whatever you wanted here, whatever things you desired that have to be available or the security team wanted, all of those good stuff is available here, right? And now because all of that is available, it makes it easier for you to believe that whatever they deploy would be according to standards, right? Now let's see the other side of the picture. Similar to the one that we had, they also have a pipeline file. Most developers are familiar with this, but if you give them an example sample pipeline file, that's all they will need. Most of the work is happening in these two Bicep files. One is deploying resource group, the other is deploying everything else. The pipeline files are just there to make sure Azure DevOps understands what to deploy. That's it. Variables, task 1, deploy resource group. Task 2, deploy the other Bicep file with just the variables assigned to it. Very easy learning curve. There's nothing complicated. This Bicep file can basically be taken as is, unmodified. Just adding a couple of variables and it's ready for another deployment. If you add another resource here, that's it. Very flat learning curves, makes it easier to adopt. And the similar thing. You could just go ahead and do new pipeline, Azure repository. This is the consumer repository, and they have their own pipeline file that I've created for them. All they have to do is just refer to that pipeline file. That's it. When they do that, they get a pipeline like this available for them. There are a couple of ways I've given them, depending on how and who is comfortable with doing what. So deploying with just YAML or just PowerShell and script variables, a number of ways. You could deploy it with script variables too, if you want it in the Python, in the pipeline script. When they do that, all they have to do is just run the deployment, and we have one resource group that originated here. There would be another one that would come up and deploy that resources for the consumer. So very small code, quick deployment, quick implementation, and easy to test. Right? Couple of things that that would come up. It might be possible when you're referring to that container registry, you might get permission issues like the one that is highlighted right now on screen. Yeah, if I could just zoom in a little bit. Okay, maybe I can't. Yeah, so you might get unauthorized even though your IT administrator says they've given you access. The point here is that sometimes Visual Studio Code doesn't recognize. So all you have to do is do AZ connect to Azure account, and maybe wait for a couple of seconds. Or if you don't get it, just close and open the code, Visual Studio Code, and this would go away. When this goes away, you get prompts, all the prompts that I've shown you as a consumer. So when this thing goes away, you get prompts for required values. This prompt here. Otherwise, you get the one at the bottom where code has no idea what you want there. Now, required values are the values that do not have default values given in the template. So choose carefully. What do you want as default value and what do you not want as default value? I do not put default values for most of the variables. So it's easier to customize. It's easier to use in many different environments. Yeah. Otherwise, that does not pop up as a variable that's required, and eventually leads to confusion, and people deploy it, and then they end up with a situation that's something else. Yeah. Pipelines here are pretty simple, and because now you've reduced the complexity, the number of errors that could happen are very limited now. All they can get is that certain restrictions or certain lengths were not met, or you do not have access to certain resource or the resource group to deploy. The second one is dealt by the service connections. All the pipelines, people who use pipelines are familiar with service connections, so your resource developers would be comfortable with it. But just to highlight this has to have a proper access to whatever resources you're trying to deploy to. Yeah. So if you're trying to test on a resource group, which I'm not, so I want to test it on a whole subscription, that's this. But depending on where you want to go and how much do you want to share, this is basically it. Yeah. The other thing worth mentioning is, while this deployment happens, is that this container registry needs two kind of permissions. One for you as an IT administrator who wants to make sure your resources are deployed in a certain way with a certain security features. You have to have the role assignment of an owner or somebody who can push it. So ACL push is basically what you need here. Where did I go? Yeah. Or you could have contributor directly. I have my service accounts and my name as contributor here. People who want to consume, they need ACL pull for the pipeline, because pipeline doesn't have to read it. Pipeline just has to get the modules. So people who are not writing the deployment bicep file for the consumers, they only need ACL ACR pull. People who are actually writing these consumer files, these small bits of code, they need reader too. When you get readers, that's when you get that small prompt thingy of the required properties. And that's how these things are rendered. So all of these descriptions, documentation, they come up because the reader permissions are there. But the deployments happen because of ACR pull here. So pipeline doesn't need to read these because they do not have to edit it. They just have to pull the resource repository from there, from the container registry. Cool. Yeah, a new resource group should be here. Yeah, so MIS testing, MIG testing, and talking about fast deployment and deployment of proper naming conventions, proper security protocols. Yeah, let's open one of them. Keyboard, let's say. So all the proper tags are here, and the policy for soft deletion should be here somewhere. Yeah, purge protection enabled by default. So there's no point of contention there. When you make things easier for the developers, the adoption becomes a bit much easier. And the discussions become a bit more easier to achieve. Yeah. Yeah, a couple of things to note. The naming conventions, probably talk about that first before you implement the templates. And your consumers do not need access to the producer templates. All of this is your company's security profile. So what is being done here and what is being restricted is done by IT administrators in conjunction with the security administrators. So these big templates that we see here, most of these could be copy pasted to on the new resources. If you see the team names, could be copy pasted. All these variables, most of these variables could just be copy pasted to create a new template. It feels like these long templates are created every single time for every resource, but I've reused most of this template on another resources. So you created one, the standard of what exactly do you need, what kind of tags do you need, or what kind of properties do you need, what kind of naming convention do you need. Define it in the first template, and then you can just reuse it to create the other templates. Similar with the pipelines, they're basically all the same. All that changes is what they deploy in this section here. And I love the variables for that very reason. You don't have to change it everywhere, just change the variable value here. And with that, we come to the deployment, and we see that the deployment should happen. And with this, just a second, yeah. So all the deployments could be audited. So whatever we've done here is gone in activity log also, so the deployments can be audited too, right? Everything that I've talked about here, I've also written blog posts around it. So both of these things are available as a blog post for more discussion and more details of why and what I'm doing about the explanation of the code here. I'll be sharing the links for both of them, so you could go ahead and scrutinize the template also. Plus, the code is available on GitHub on my repository also. So producer and the consumer, both of them. And with that, I am open to questions if you have any. And that was basically the introduction for the DevOps and how you could use Bicep modules to organize things and have better adoption of infrastructure as code in your organization. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for this great session, Mohit.
Amit.
Valuable. Learned a lot.
Yeah, I hope so too. I really hope so too. I hope
That was
I,
so great. I really love the sessions together with the laboratories. So that helps a lot to understand. It's like touching the technology and seeing what's happening. Comparing to the slides, so the slides is also good if it contains a little bit of visualize. I mean, not in this case, not about this session, but in general, when slides contain some kind of pictures or visualize showing the connection between the technology. But however, in this session, you literally showed it live, so that helps a lot. Actually, it's kind of workshop, so
that
that
was my
helps.
aim too, Hamid, because I think talking about compliance or talking about the adoption of the problems of adoption might not be might not become very consumable until you exactly see why this thing makes adoption easy. I mean, look at the size of the code. This
Yeah,
is this would is this is debatable, right? This is actually a talking point with the development team. You could just say, look, I'm doing the hard work. All you have to do is just do this, and
yeah.
this versus um, this makes a big difference in showing why something was difficult and why something became a little bit easier.
That's where the magic happens. Yeah. We have a question. I'm going to show it on the screen so you can see it.
Well, it depends what you want to do. I like to put my parameters in the parameter file. You could put parameters. You're talking about the parameter file for Bicep, right? And that works too. That works too. This demo was basically showing the pipeline and the Bicep file separately, but you could have parameter files there too. That works. But
Uh,
when you are a producer, try to keep these parameters open, so the other guys, the consumers, can leverage this the space where they can put their own parameter files and work with it. Yeah.
Hope that answers your question, Lebu. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Anyone else, if you have any question, just type in the chat so I will highlight it on the screen so Mohit can answer any concerns you have. Okay, we have another comment from same user. I prefer config maps via variable for sure as it becomes more readable.
Well, yeah, that might be the case for you. Yeah.
Perfect.
In my opinion, it's up to choice. As long as you like what you see, that should be good enough. I'd like to leave that choice to the developers. So because developers have also experience with these kind of situations, and they like config maps too. And if they're comfortable with it, I'm comfortable with it. All I need is for them to use the Bicep, and
Yeah,
my job is to make it as easier for them as possible. Yeah.
we have Mehtat also here at the backstage. I'm gonna add him also here in the stage. Mehtat, anything you have to share?
Hey, Mohit, thank you for your great presentation. And I'm not from that background, but I actually love to learn more. And as Hamid mentioned, when we jump into the codes and in the lab, the actual workspace, that makes a lot of actually it makes the life easier for tech guys. They basically would like to just see what's happening behind the scene, and what is the actual work that we are doing. Yeah, great session, thank you very much.
Thank you for having
That's
me.
perfect, Mohit. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you don't have any more questions, so we can call it a perfect session.
Oh, that would be nice. Thank you so much. But yeah, if you have any more questions, I'm going to share the links that I mentioned and the comment about the repositories and stuff. So yeah.
Just adding a comment here for anyone who is now in the live chat, or even watching the recorded video afterward. You are more than welcome to just comment below the both recorded session in LinkedIn or in YouTube channel. And of course, Mohit will be available to answer those questions as well.
Yeah.
Another thing we can do, Mohit, if you could send the links to me, doesn't matter over an email or LinkedIn, but because we will promote the recording of the session immediately afterwards, so I can also put those links under the abstract of the session, recorded
Okay,
session.
that's fine.
You
I can
can
do
use
that.
it.
On
Yeah,
LinkedIn, should I pass you on LinkedIn or the
yes,
email?
yeah,
Yeah, I could do that. Yeah.
LinkedIn is perfect.
Yeah.
So wonderful. Thanks, Mohit, for this perfect session. Thanks everyone who joined. If you missed this session, so this record will be available immediately whenever we end the stream, so you can watch it again, or you can watch it if you have missed it. So thank you. Looking forward to another sessions
Thank you
with
again. Have a
the
good one,
hero.
guys. Thanks for having
Wishing
me.
again, Mohit, in the future.
I hope so too. Yeah.
Great. Have a
Sure.
nice
Great.
evening. Cheers.
You too. Bye.